Hello, my name is Margaret Newhouse, and I'm the director of the Donald McNeely Center for Entrepreneurship. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning for our featured presentation, The Transformational Power of Data, with Angela Jerbeck, College of St. Benedict class of 1990, and her colleague, Dr. Anu Sharma. Angie is an exemplary model of the intersection of the entrepreneurial mindset and spirit, as she noticed a problem within a school system, and then was able to leverage her liberal arts education and context to her Benedictine values by developing a team to set forth to be a catalyst for change and impact. Due to her exemplary vision and leadership to focus on the impact of social and emotional learning in the K-12 education space, the Donald McNeely Center for Entrepreneurship selected Angie as the 2020 College of St. Benedict St. John's University Social Entrepreneur of the Year. At the Center of Entrepreneurship, we are all about the intersection of the liberal arts through collaboration. And was so pleased with the ability to partner for today's presentation throughout the St. John's community, including faculty and students representing the new Academic Program Edition Data Analytics minor, the Eugene McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement, the John and Elizabeth Myers Chair in Management in the Global Business Leadership Program, the Education Department, and Student Club Benny's in Business to promote today's event. I also owe a debt of gratitude to members of the BAR team who have collaborated on the program presentation today, especially Ali, Ari, and Hannah, as well as our Donald McNeely Center Coordinator, Kelly Gradine, and our student staff, Morgan and Claire, to make our time with Angie and Anu possible. And with that, I'd like to introduce Grace Steinhagen, a junior communication major and global business minor, and a member of our Benny's in Business executive leadership team, to formally introduce Angela and Anu.
Thank you, Margaret. Angela Jerbeck is the founder and executive director of BAR Center, a nationally recognized nonprofit organization that builds strong school communities that support student success by improving school culture, school climate, and educator effectiveness. Developed by Jerbeck in 1998, the BAR model has been implemented in 180 schools throughout the United States with consistent results regardless of school type, size, or location. In virtually every geographical location, the implementation of BAR has resulted in a statistically significant reduction in failure rates by an average of 34.5% after just 1 year of implementation. Similarly, course credits earned increase, grade point averages improve, and the opportunity gap narrows when a school implements BAR. In the 2019-2020 school year, BAR Center reached a milestone in serving more than 100,000 students and was awarded a prestigious Networks for School Improvement grant through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Tested and validated by the American Institutes for Research, BAR stands alone as one of the most consistently proven secondary school improvement models in the country. After graduating from the College of St. Benedict, Angela began her career in education as a licensed K-12 teacher and a secondary school counselor in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She is an author, speaker, and education innovator whose expertise lies in school improvement, equity, youth development, adolescent counseling, and using data and evidence in schools. As an executive director of BAR Center, Angie provides thought leadership and operational oversight of the organization and the national network of BAR educators. I'm now going to pass it off to Summer Olson, Junior and Benny's in Business board member as well.
Anu Sharma is a senior research scientist at the BAR Center. Anu was the original evaluator for the BAR model in 1999 and has been integral to testing its effectiveness over the past 20 years. Anu has nearly 30 years of experience in conducting evaluations through her employment at Search Institute, the Minnesota Institute of Public Health, the Education Development Center, Incorporated. She has served as co-investigator for the Sibling Interaction and Behavior Study at the University of Minnesota Center for Twin and Family Research.
I think we're up. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for being here. We want to try to make sure that we're meeting your needs as much as possible. So we'll follow along with the chat, but we'll kind of talk the storyline and you'll see kind of the importance of data in terms of all the work that we've done. So Ari, if you'll move me to the next slide. So we're going to kind of start off a bit in terms of my path at St. Ben's as well as my professional path. So I graduated from St. Ben's in 1990, and yes, I did marry a Johnny. As much as I said that wouldn't happen, it did. So we then moved to the Twin Cities, and I started my role as a high school counselor in St. Louis Park. And after 5 years of serving as a counselor for ninth grade, half of the ninth graders failed at least one course. It was incredibly discouraging. So kind of year after year, I'm trying all the best practices, all the kind of newest research, and every year, half of the ninth graders failed a course. So at the time, I went to the principal to tenure my resignation. I'm like, clearly I am not doing this job well. I mean, half the kids are failing and I'm trying everything. And he really pushed it back on me and said, this is not unique to you. It's not unique to our school. Right now, about half of the ninth graders fail a course. And he said, I really encourage you to come up with another model, come up with another system to address this. And so I took that away, and it was summer vacation. And I had 2 young kids, and I was sitting in the backyard and I was going through these failure reports and feeling incredibly discouraged. I also was feeling discouraged with parenting. So in the spirit of candor, Haley, my daughter, was like 3-4 years old and was incessantly chewing crayons, which is not what makes a mother's heart proud. And you're like, what is up with my crayon chewing kid? And then I have my sweet little baby boy kind of beside, but I'm also feeling discouraged there. And I was talking to my grandmother and I was just going, ugh, this is not working. And she really had this great new perspective. She says, but at Sunday school, you know, Haley's doing great. And at preschool, she's doing this and all these other places. And Joan is doing well here. And all of a sudden I realized, to be able to effectively parent, I needed multiple perspectives. I needed to know what was happening in places that I was not seeing, and I needed to have it be strength-based. And I had this kind of aha moment that this was the same issue we're experiencing within schools, that right now, every teacher is just seeing that kid for one slice of time, and they're not seeing how well things are going in other places. And we're not looking at this from a strength-based perspective. And so that really was the impetus in terms of the beginning of BAR, which is once again stands for Building Assets, Reducing Risks. Ari, if you're moving to the next slide, but BAR is really predicated on a couple principles. First of all, our tagline is a really important part of our work. So we talk about same students, but when we talk about same students, we really are talking about each and every student. We have a deep commitment to equity in all of our work. Same teachers. We believe strongly that the educators at the school building know their kids best and know their community best. They need to have a different system to be able to realize kind of all the talent they have there, but we believe they have the capacity to do the work. And better results is going to be a lot of what we're talking about today. We have to have data. We have to have actionable data for the school to work from. We need to have data to show that what we're doing is making a difference. And we have to be measuring in multiple ways, quantitative and qualitative. So that's kind of some undergirding in philosophy. BAR itself is predicated on 2 pillars. The first pillar is relationships, that we have to be actively fostering relationships that are staff to student. Most people kind of know that one, but we also really have to work on relationships from staff to staff, because in particular, when you start seeing data and data trends, you have to be working on what is that going to look like for a healthy staff relationship. Otherwise, people become defensive. You're going to have people who are going to just kind of shut down and not engage. And the other piece is student to student. So to have a healthy culture, you really have to work on those 3 types of relationships: staff to student, and staff to staff. The other pillar is data. which is what a lot we're going to talk about today. Step one, we have to have transparency in data. Just like me as a parent, I need that math teacher to know how that student is doing in science, how they're doing in art, how they're doing in physical education. I cannot have the school counselor be the only person to know that even though Margaret is failing English, she is doing incredible in math. I need those teachers to be able to have that information directly. The other piece is I need to really work on how adults can collect qualitative data and share it in a systemic way that's strength-based, because there is so much data that's available within schools, and it can't just be a kind of a water cooler conversation, and it can't be siloed. So how do we leverage kind of all that qualitative data, and how do we share that together? So those are kind of the pillars of BAR itself. So kind of from the very beginning on, in terms of our work, we have always measured things. So Anu Sharma is one of my best friends, and we've been working together for over 20 years. And in the very beginning, when I first had envisioned BAR, I wrote and applied for a SIG grant, a state incentive grant, to be able to put the model in place and be able to assess it. And Anu was the evaluator that was assigned to this project. So we have been on this journey kind of from the very beginning on. So Ari, I think you can move us. And I think Anu, you're gonna kind of kick us off.
I have to say that I did not go to St. Ben's, but I wish I had, because it's such a beautiful campus. Although I'm going to digress for 1 minute. The campus that I attended for most of my schooling was Penn State University. And I have to say hello to Dr. Phil Byrne, who is on the faculty. And he and I were classmates together in the Department of Statistics back at Penn State. And I'm so happy to see your face on the screen, Phil. I'm so happy to see you. Anyway, okay, back to the data and back to our story. I have had the privilege of being with BAR since 20 years ago. And today we want to share some principles of data that we've learned over the years, some lessons that we've learned, and some the hard way. But I first want to ground you in the results that we've gotten. The BAR model has been more rigorously tested than any other educational model in the country. And that could mean it's the most tested in the world. It gets results. So just to establish our credibility so that you take us seriously when we start telling you stories about our data, we're going to spend about 5 minutes showing you the results. But let me start with the statement that's up on the slide. It reads, a growing body of research has demonstrated the effects of socio-emotional learning on school climate, student behavior, and student academic performance. But here's the part I want you to pay attention to. Critical to this discussion is the use of rigorous research designs that test the causal nature of this relationship. Now, you know this, but the only way that the scientific model can attribute cause or causality is through the use of the experimental method, treatment and control, and people being randomly assigned to one of those two conditions. And those are extremely challenging to undertake in the real world of education, and especially within education at the secondary level. But BAR has done so, we've done so. Ari, the next slide, please. So here's our research at a glance. And I want you to know that this is not all of the work that we've done. This is not all the secondary students that we've worked with. These are just the students that were involved in our studies. And I also should say that our research has been done primarily at the secondary level, but elementary and middle schools have found our findings and our model to be applicable in their settings as well. So we've done 12 within school randomized control trials, and they've been in the states of Minnesota, California, Maine, Kentucky, and Texas. And if you think about it, that means that we've tested the model on both coasts, in the Midwest, in Appalachia, and in the Southwest. 4,700 plus ninth grade students, 149 teachers, and the measures that we tested, the quantitative measures, credits earned, passing courses, standardized test scores. We also surveyed students and teachers to get their perceptions. The next slide shows what we did in our first in our first school, St. Louis Park. This is the school that Angie worked in, where the principal told her, excuse me for 1 second, to come up with a different model because failure rates were a national problem. And being, as she said, young and naive, she decided, okay, I'll meet that challenge. But these are the data from nearly 2 decades of work at St. Louis Park High School. And I'm sure all of you know that St. Louis Park is a first-ring suburb of Minnesota. And this is what we got in that school. The first thing was that if you look at that graph on the left, we've got solid lines, and those are St. Louis Park lines. The dotted lines are Minnesota state averages. So the first thing that you should notice is that the solid lines are always above the dotted lines. So that means that St. Louis Park students always did better than Minnesota counterparts. And that was the case for all students and for Black and African American students. But then I'd like you to take a look at where those solid lines meet up. They meet in 2017. And what that means is that Black or African American students did just as well, in fact, a little bit better than their white peers at St. Louis Park. We call that in education closing the achievement gap. And the achievement gap is the gap that we see when Black, Latinx, students of poverty do not do as well as white students. And so BAR was able to close the achievement gap, and now it's more commonly referred to as the opportunity gap. So on the right side, you'll see that the number of advanced placement and international baccalaureate, AP and IB tests that students took at the school steadily increased over time. In fact, St. Louis Park received the award from ACT, this testing organization that may bring back memories for many of you for their achievement in this regard. So our experience at St. Louis Park gave us the confidence to test the model elsewhere. And so we did. Ari, the next slide. We took the data and we took the model and we tested it at a suburban Los Angeles high school, Hemet High School in California. And those data are on this slide. The first graph shows that failure rates went down over time, and they did so for all students and for Hispanic students. The second graph on the right shows standardized test scores in reading and math, and BAR students in blue did statistically significantly better than non-BAR students in green. The next slide shows our testing of the model in 11 other schools. These bar graphs show that failure rates were lower for BAR students in dark blue than non-BAR in light blue. And that was true for the full sample, girls, boys, minority, and white students. So how did we get these significant results? How did we do this? So the American Institutes of Research, our evaluator for these randomized controlled trials, they conducted something that's called a mediation analysis. The principal investigator told us that it's very rare that a theory of change is actually subjected to a test, but this one was, and it held up. So let's go through it a little bit. We get results by working with teachers to change their attitudes and behaviors. And you can see exactly what we work on underneath the categories, the two blue categories of teacher attitudes and behaviors, those are the specific things that teachers change. The teachers then effect change in student attitudes. Students feel more supported, they feel that more is expected of them, and they feel more engaged in and excited about school. Then they change their behaviors. They show up more, they have fewer issues, and better social and emotional skills. And finally, we get those academic outcomes, those prizes at the end of all this hard work. Students graduate at higher rates, they have better math and reading scores, they increase the number of credits they earn, and they pass core classes at higher rates. So it starts with the teachers and ends with the students. Now, this may seem simple, but it's hard to do, and it goes against almost all current practice. The superintendent at St. Louis Park told us that when he wanted to change math scores, for example, he always started on the right side of this diagram. He would change the math curriculum. He never started on the left side with teacher attitudes. But after BAR was implemented in his district, that's now all he does. So Angie, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how we're going to proceed.
So I think the key piece in terms of us moving forward is data really has been the impetus for our growth. So in terms of those who are business majors, we've received over $57 million in funding for our data. So we were not well known, our brand was not well known, but we once again have had over $35 million in research funds from the federal government in terms of our work. As earlier referenced, last year we received a $13 million grant from Bill and Melinda Gates. But data has been critical for the school to transform, but it's also been critical for our organization to grow. So our data has been our proof point. Our data has been the reason that we've been able to continue to have funding come in. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to hit some kind of large overarching goals in terms of how you look for data, within the setting, but then also how you leverage data to be able to grow your organization. Anus?
Okay, so we're going to talk you through several principles and then just share some illustrations, basically share some stories of why we believe these principles have worked for us over time. So the first principle is to value the data. And most programs, I will tell you, when they ask you to quote unquote evaluate them, they aren't really interested in being evaluated. Most of the time, people treat it as a compliance thing. They want to check the box that they've got an evaluator, and then they want to be done with it. And my experience as an evaluator is that we're used to being kept on the outside and not really being invited in. Most evaluations go like this. The program goes along. I mean, it's just implementing, but at the end of the year, an annual evaluation report is due. So at year's end, there's a scurry. The program director and staff, they look madly around for anything they can find to get into that annual report. Sign-in sheets, evaluation forms, student surveys, whatever. They send that in a big batch to the evaluator, who then writes a report. And maybe to augment all of that, data that was in a file cabinet somewhere, they might do some interviews. The evaluator might do some interviews, but then everyone would call it a day, or they'd call it an annual report, and basically repeat that pattern year after year after year. But I have to say that from the beginning, Angie was not interested in compliance. She was different. If she was going to invest X% of her budget in anything, she was going to get the full value of that investment. Maybe, Angie, that's because your father was a successful entrepreneur and you understood the value of that investment. So I realized early on that I was going to be used in a good way. I wasn't going to be on the fringe of anything. I was going to be invited in, and she was going to use my expertise to look at the program. So she wasn't interested in compliance, but she was different on a second count too. She wanted me to look at everything, and I mean everything. She called me whenever she smelled anything going awry. And again, this is different than most programs where they try to shine a good light on everything for the evaluator. Angie wanted to be told what was going well, but she also wanted to be told when something was going wrong. If anything was concerning or upsetting, she pointed it out to me so that I could try to get to the bottom of it. Or if I saw it first, she wanted to hear about it. So, principle one, value the data. Angie?
I knew the next slide, Ari. Principle 2, use the data and teach others to use it. So as Anu said, I was all about, I am not going to in particular have other educators invest in a model if I do not have a high level of confidence that this is going to work. And if anything is not working, I need to know what it is to either shore it up or abandon it. So we need to be able to really have this be kind of moving forward. Our whole model is equipping educators with the same philosophy. How do you use the data you have, and how do you action on it? So I'll do a kind of quick illustration. We had a large school in California, and they had a really significant opportunity gap. So particular between their Black students and non-Black students. And so we first had them disaggregate the data. So they were able to identify that, and they put a number of strategies in place and initially saw a reduction in their failure rates, but then it stopped. The gap was still big, and they weren't getting any more movement, and they were feeling discouraged. And so we were then pushing them, you need to disaggregate the data again. And kind of after they did that, they recognized that they had a gender difference, and they had been deploying many, many strategies for African-American males, did not do anything for the Black girls, and the Black girl failure rate was absolutely driving those numbers. So until we taught them to be able to first pull that data and then continue to kind of slice and dice it to actually find out what is the root cause, because what they were doing was putting in more and more strategies to assist the Black boys, and we're completely neglecting this other population. And so that gap was not moving. But that kind of is an illustration of when you're working with, for us schools, working with organizations, until you actually get to a resolution, you've got to keep pushing and lean into that data so you don't be putting in strategies in place that isn't moving things. Anu, you're going to have the next slide.
So principle 3 is use quantitative and qualitative data. So at BAR, we believe in using both. So maybe to begin with, let me start with some brief definitions of those so we're all talking about the same thing. Quantitative data, basically it's numbers. We're counting, we're using checklists, surveys, pre-post tests, or analyzing existing statistics. Those are just some examples of types of quantitative data. Qualitative data, to me, it's just words. So quantitative is numbers, qualitative words. We look at anecdotes, case studies, focus groups, key informant interviews, observations, and analysis of existing files. We use the same systematic processes with both, but they are just different types of data. The next slide shows you some of the benefits of quantitative data because both have pros and cons. So quantitative data, they're standardized, succinct, easily aggregated for analysis, systematic, presented in a short space, and the generalizability tends to be widely accepted. Some of the benefits of qualitative data on the next slide are that they're detailed and variable, unanticipated benefits, concerns are possible, they show up, they offer explanations for short-term outcomes or even long-term, and they help generate new ideas or theories. So Angie, I'm going to let you give an illustration of the importance of using both types of data in one of our schools in California.
A really key piece in terms of this work is to absolutely both value both and to be equipping others to value both. So we talk a lot about noticing as a skill, and that, you know, with your staff as well as with students, but really honing into kind of noticing as a skill. So this story was, this may not shock those that are education majors, there's a lot of initiative fatigue. And so when a school comes to be told they're going to do BAR, and BAR is about relationships and data, you don't always get a rousing kind of round of applause. So, you know, often it's coming in from kind of administration because our results, once again, are unparalleled. We have outcomes within the first year. Many times staff are like, I'm doing relationships, I'm doing data. I don't know that I need this, but okay, I'll play along. So one of our schools, once again, had about 1,000 ninth graders. So it's a big school right near Los Angeles. And one of the strategies in our model is to have adults be meeting together weekly, reflecting on data, quantitative and qualitative. So it was a second week of school, happened to be 3 male teachers. And one teacher said, I've got 3 girls skipping my class every Friday and Monday. Someone better call them from the front office and give them a detention. They are skipping class. Next teacher says, you know what? Now that you reference it, when I walk through the lunchroom, they're not sitting at the 9th grade table. They're hanging up against the wall with a bunch of older guys. They should get a quiet lunch. Next teacher says, you know, now that you mention it, I don't think they're making dress code. Their clothes are not appropriate for high school. Someone should call them in the front office and they should get a dress code violation. So we are coaching somebody at the school that takes this information, and they then came back to us and said, here's kind of what the report is on this group. So we then help them kind of dig through the data. Well, it turns out these 3 14-year-old girls were all being sex trafficked. They were in foster care. They were being shipped out on Thursday night. They were being shipped back on Monday night. Those 3 observations would never have resulted in this level of kind of assistance for these girls, especially in the second week of 9th grade, if that staff had not been equipped to be using both quantitative, so attendance, as well as qualitative data, and then sharing those strategies. So once again, that they can be sharing those observations. So we literally are having reports kind of across the country of lives being, saved in terms of that level of empowerment. So our model really is unleashing the talent within our schools, but having them be able to utilize and value value these both types of data. So these kind of, I go back to schools, there are so many things that you just see out of the corner of your eye, or you have a little gut instinct in terms of the staff at St. Ben's and St. John's. You're like, that just seems, a little off. If you can be able to either be assured that it's not by talking to another colleague to say nope, or be able to kind of triangulate that to say we have something we need to address. So that is kind of a glimpse into what the model is kind of doing over and over and over again. I knew I'll have you take the next piece, but by the way, if there are any questions or different things, please I know we're just kind of powering through and you have time for questions at the end, but certainly if there are questions as we're going on, feel free to stop us.
Absolutely. One PS to the story that Angie just relayed is I believe that was a bigger sex trafficking ring than just those 3 girls. I mean, they had kind of a big ring going on, and it was just around the school boundaries where they had a number of cars that would wait for different pockets of children at the end of the day. So they really, just that tip of the iceberg, they were really able to save a lot of students' lives beyond just that of the 3 girls. So principle number 4 is surprises are your friend. Now, I'm sure that all of you who have taken a statistics class know about outliers and how valuable they can be, because what's on the outskirts of a distribution can often be nuggets, gold nuggets of information. That's where the whole resiliency literature has sprung from, meaning, okay, why are these children who should be in the middle of the distribution or at the low end of the distribution actually at the high end? How are they resilient when they've had trauma and many difficult circumstances? But beyond just outliers, it's also the case that outcomes may be different than what you expect. And we'll talk about that more in this slide and the next one, both principles. But in evaluating BAR, we've learned that surprises are our friend. One of our outcomes in the very early years was discipline referrals. And we thought that if the program was implemented and if conflict, particularly peer-to-peer conflict, was addressed, we would see fewer discipline referrals. But instead, in the first semester, they shot up. And we were surprised. But what was happening was that teachers were noticing more, and they felt they had a place to refer students. So they felt comfortable making referrals, and they were taking advantage of that. Now, what happened also over time is that the referrals were handled much better because there were systems in place through the BAR model. So over time, discipline incidents went down, but our initial outcome that we thought would decrease, referrals, actually increased. So you often will find that on the way to success, something else pops up that ends up being highly informative. We did not have discipline incidents in our model. We had referrals only. We ended up dropping that one and knowing that that was an indicator towards something that was much more important, and that was incidents themselves. So Angie, let's move on and talk about outcomes.
Outcomes may not be what you think they are. And this also really speaks to valuing context and what the community values. This can't be something imposed because this model is, once again, about same students, same teachers, better results. But making sure that you're not imposing this is something important unless it's important to them. So that's that one. Anu, you're up next.
Principle 6 is you are part of the data. So here I'd like to make a point about conducting research and evaluation, and that's along the lines of bias. So I learned from a mentor years ago, someone who taught me more than I can say, Dr. Wayne Harding at Harvard. And he argued against the proposition that evaluators can remain objective. He said, first of all, evaluators are often hired by the project itself. So they are contractually, and that means monetarily, beholden. Even as in my case, if they're external to the project, in that I worked for a different organization. I worked for a different nonprofit during the early years of evaluating BAR. But he said, second, most of the evaluators he's met are nice people, and they don't like delivering bad news. They don't necessarily sugarcoat or withhold, but he said, we try to deliver good and bad news, but bad news without being offensive or making program people feel like they're bad or not doing a good job or feeling ashamed. So objectivity, he taught me, is almost impossible to achieve. So what he urged me to do was to name my biases up front and be aware of them. But he said, don't try to hide behind a veneer of objectivity. And I have found that over the years to be extremely useful advice. So what I have tried to do is develop good relationships with the program people and the program staff that I've actually been in the position of evaluating, quote unquote. And by doing that, they trust me more and they tell me more. So we work together and we get better results. So Angie, I'm going to turn this back over to you to talk about iTime and how people are part of that data too, iTime and UTime.
Sure. And just, this is our last data pillar. And I saw that we already had one question, but then we'll be taking more questions. And so kind of there's a semblance of the arc here. So one of the strategies that we deploy is to be able to foster a relationship from both staff to student, as you heard, staff to staff, as well as student to student. We provide both a structure as well as a lot of coaching on how to do that. I'm going to talk you through an example right now, but you also are getting the handout, so you'll be able to have it. Actually, Ari, can you get me back to the first slide still, so I can kind of talk through a little bit more? Thank you so much. So the overarching, so first of all, you're going to see the letter U as well as the letter I. So we are working in K-12 now. So as Anu had referenced, we started in 9th grade. So I was like 9th grade counselor, and we've got to stop the students failing so we can actually get them to graduate, to go on. As schools were doing this, schools are like, this just makes sense. This is the way all of our schools should work. All of our staff should work. It was slightly problematic in terms of the randomized control trial because we were having, bleeding impacts and, mitigating our impacts. But the schools now have taken this on 6-12. And as of 2 years ago, we have elementary schools taking this on. We have our first full district implemented in South St. Paul that they're doing this K-12. So the pronoun I really is the pronoun I. I was very tongue in cheek when I developed this in 98, that I said, it's 9th graders, guys, let's just talk about them. Give it 30 minutes, we're gonna learn about you. UTime is once again the elementary version. In terms of the goal of an iTime, there is SEL material being taught, but it is not skill building as much as it's fostering a relationship. So a notable difference is the classroom teacher facilitates the lesson, they don't teach the lesson, which means you will do the lesson also. So the students get to learn who you are, just as you are learning who they are. It's a great way to collect qualitative data, but it's also really critical in terms of the student being able to bond and know who the adult is. So this is an activity that we do once again with down to 3rd grade, as well as staff to staff does this. Take a paper plate, and in the upper left, you're going to talk about activities I do. You're going to talk about interests. You're going to talk about responsibilities. And you'll talk about miscellaneous. Now, Ari, the next slide. So here's an example of mine. I was a music major at St. Ben's. I still love the performing arts. We go to shows all the time. During the pandemic, it's very hard. I love writing in terms of kind of my interests. Activities, I've been part of a book club for over 20 some years. I'm part of a food group. I love good food. Since the pandemic, I'm slightly obsessed with my Peloton. Everybody who knows me gets to hear about my Peloton all the time because I really love that. Responsibilities, I have a family. Bar is a responsibility in terms of active member of my parish and for providing service to others. And then miscellaneous, I'm trying to always stay up to date on policy implications across the nation, trying to kind of manage time. But this would be an example of something that I would do, and I would be sharing this with the class. This is a kind of a piece of me. The students would also be doing it. An example then is when the students are doing this and if the student doesn't turn in their math assignment, I don't immediately go to, clearly they didn't care, clearly they didn't want to do the assignment. I'm going, boy, I know they watch their younger siblings. I also know they play basketball. I think there's a big basketball tournament this past weekend. Maybe I'll ask them what's going on first. But this is an activity that is done weekly, and all the classroom teachers do this to be able to, once again, get a better sense of who the student is, but the student also then has a sense of who the adult is. So we have fidelity forums that our coaches come in to be able to observe these pieces. But once again, the overriding goal is that fostering of a relationship, which also, once again, really helps foster empathy and understanding. So you can really be moving those things forward. Ari, next slide. Here's an example of a class that has done these. So we've got, once again, as referenced in the beginning, we're working with 100,000 students. So we have many students that are sharing what's on their plate, just as we have many adults sharing kind of what's on their plate. And I think we're up to questions now. So Kelly or others, I'm not sure what the best way to facilitate this. I'll bump this over.
Yes, hi, I'm going to just bounce in. We have a number of questions in the chat. It's Margaret again. The first question, and I don't know if we have the capability to raise our hand here, but I'd love to take questions from the audience too, if you're able to flag it. You know, Allison, maybe you could join us if you wouldn't mind asking your question out loud. Allison is the chair of our education department, and she has a question just about the intercultural skills and attitudes and helping the faculty grow in that space. But Allison, are you able to pop on?
I am. Thank you, Angela and Anu, for being here today. This is really exciting. I recently learned that someone who I worked with at Concordia Language Villages is working with BAR. And so I keep seeing her work and kind of learning more and more. So it's really exciting to hear from you today. Thank you for doing this presentation. Something that I'm very interested in is intercultural development. I do a lot of research in that area, and I do world languages and ESL. Those are my pedagogy areas. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit, maybe you even have an anecdote to share about working with maybe students who come from a refugee background or have experienced trauma, and that intercultural piece of helping teachers feel prepared to work with students for whom the cultural frame around what it means to be a successful student is different. So I'll just throw that out there, and I'm just curious what you're doing.
I'll start a bit, and Anu, certainly feel free to come in. So a couple of things. We both provide direct education information. So our model itself is both training and coaching. So a school that takes this on has 2 days of training for their entire staff for 3 years in a row. And there is a 1 full day dedicated to equity. There is 1 full day dedicated to trauma. There is another day on substance use, and there's another one in terms of adult behaviors and how we work together. So they're both overtly getting information, but then that information is ongoing utilized kind of as a team, because our coaching, once again, is continuing to be having a broader understanding and kind of opening that door in terms of the pieces. We have been named, so there is the Rakes Foundation, probably 5 years ago, named, they had 10 organizations that they've named as part of the BELL network, Building Equitable Learning Environments, and BAR was one of those 10. So we have worked really closely in a network nationally on these issues. And then once again, how we then deploy it to our schools and then subsequently our students. I'm going to do a first frame of an example, but then Anu, certainly feel free if you have another one. My example is there had been some biases or beliefs in some of our schools, in particular for one of the things we talk about family involvement and not parent involvement. It's very intentional in our language, because even in terms of that frame, I think then you can potentially have some biases. But we had some families that were, very large Latina families, and there was the sense that there was a lot of obligations on these students because they're taking care of many younger family members. What we were able to help that school realize is they also had a ton of aunties that deeply cared about this child. So as much as they may or may not be able to access a parent, if they would put the call out, they would have 4 or 5 aunties in that school in a heartbeat who cared deeply about the success of that child, but really framing what family engagement or parent engagement looks like and not seeing things in a deficit model. So yes, they do have lots of obligations with younger siblings, and they have a large family network that is deeply invested in the student's success. Anu, do you have anything else?
No, I think you've covered it.
Oh, Parker, if you wouldn't mind jumping on, you have a couple of 2-part question, and you probably could speak to it.
Hi, Angela and Anu, thank you for speaking with us today. Mine is sort of a technical question on the impact evaluation side of things. One is sort of, it's probably a little too technical, but in terms of running your RCTs, you're running that sort of at the school level. You're randomizing across the district at the school level. Is that correct?
Actually, yes, it is correct. The first set of data that I presented was actually within school randomized control trials. So the data that I presented was taking the 9th grade class and splitting it into 2.
Okay.
So that was done at the student level. What I have not talked about is that we are currently in a 66 school
Between
school. Thank you. Between school, which is what you're talking about. And we are in the 4th year of a 5-year study of that between school trial. So your question is still pertinent, because I think you're, at least from the chat, you're talking about how do we get data from non-treated schools. But
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Angie.
I was going to say the 12 within school randomized control trials rarely have been done. So we have presented nationally on that a lot, because what you got rid of was all that noise of you won the basketball championship, you have a bad principal, this community had this. So we were able to, I went to many school board meetings and was able to convince the schools to do within school randomized control trials. So our piece is we are coaching and training the teachers in the BAR model at the same time business as usual is occurring. So whatever victories, tragedies, anything else happens. So those, all of our studies that are in the What Works Clearinghouse and the data that Anu is presenting is from 12 separate within school randomized control trials.
Okay, so you're treating the teachers and the students. You're treating the students randomly. I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand. So, is there any sort of pollution across? So the teachers are learning new things, and then the students are being treated differently. Is that correct?
So the teachers are not randomly assigned.
Right.
The students are randomly assigned to BAR and control, so treatment and control. The teachers, by virtue of licensure issues, they are not randomly assigned, but they are assigned to BAR and control. And the BAR teachers will receive the BAR training and the coaching models. The control teachers will receive it on essentially a wait list. They'll come in and get the intervention a year later for the within school randomized control trials.
Sorry, it's just I'm just thinking about the statistics here, right? So the next question really is sort of, as we think about the impacts, I see you're looking at the impacts on a number of sort of in-school metrics. And so how do you then construct sort of a cost benefit analysis for the implementation of this program for the school districts after that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Angie, we were just running numbers last week on this. Angie, I'll let you take that question.
Yeah, so actually, I had shared kind of earlier, Governor Walz had me as one of 20 people working on equity in education for the past 6 months. I've been part of this task force. So I think there's 2 different questions that I'm hearing you say. One is for the study itself, we do determine what the cost per student is. The cost per student continues to decrease over time because the model is a 3-year coaching model. We now have schools doing this model 10, 15 plus years. So the model itself typically is around $200 a student. That's roughly with a study and the evaluation. But every year that cost decreases because both the number of students increase as well as it does not require the same level of touch point. We've also done a return on investment. So this is another document that we've done because schools, unlike college, I've also explained when I was a high school counselor and half my kids are failing a class, the school needs to reteach that 9th grade class over at the same time you're teaching the 10th grade class, and there's no new money that accompanies that. So subsequently, oftentimes if you have a failure rate around 35 or 40%, even for 9th grade, if the average in Minnesota, average class size, average failure rate, that typically is around $85,000 to $90,000 a year. Our California schools are losing up to over $500,000 a year in simply repeated classes. That does not even come into account summer school, alternative schools, any of those other strategies. It's simply by having to reteach those same courses over and over again. So we also work with schools to say, what is your return on investment and how can you repurpose that funds? So many of the schools, when they start recovering the funds, add in more mental health services, add in more AP and IB classes, add in those electives that they've had to cut, because often some of our most under-resourced schools also have the most lost revenue because they're losing this money by reteaching those same courses.
Thank you.
So we had a question from a cabinet member in West Virginia as she was looking at the return on investment. And she said, you mean to tell me for less than the cost of a teacher's salary, I can reduce my failure rate by 35%, which is our average reduction in failure rate across our schools. So that's another way to think about it. But if we're talking to superintendents who are dealing with budgets constantly, especially in this day and age, that return on investment is a very important question. And thank you for raising it.
And we have John Enriquez, who has a great question in the chat. John is the leader of our assessment area. And John, if you're able to verbalize it, I'd love it if you could share your question.
Sure. I'm having some trouble with my camera, so I'm not being shy. But basically, the question is, you did a great job really talking about the value of both quantitative and qualitative data, but we don't always. There are some situations where we don't readily see how we could generate or capture qualitative data. And the example I put in the chat was in a business that sells things, you focus a lot on sales figures. How do you identify and then capture qualitative data that in a setting that maybe isn't necessarily geared toward it?
One of the things that comes immediately to mind, and I'll translate back to education, is teacher retention. And in the example that you raised, John, it would be sales force retention. I mean, sales people turn over so rapidly. At least that's been my experience. I defer to you though, because this is not my area of expertise. One of the things that we have found through the BAR model is that teacher retention and workforce retention has increased significantly. And again, that's one of those outcomes that we did not look to measure in the beginning, but it was a surprise that we ended up finding was a tremendous friend. Angie, what about other examples of qualitative data? So, I'm sorry, let me add one parenthetical remark to that. Toward teacher retention or workforce retention comes things like workforce satisfaction, teacher satisfaction, collaboration. Salespeople often feel very, very alone. And if there is a sense of team and all the qualitative indicators of a sense of team, a sense of being backed versus being out there alone, then those would be indicators, I think, that could be qualitatively captured toward that goal of retention. Angie, I'll let you brainstorm about this one too.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is education is actually very quantitative heavy, and then qualitative light, I think is the wrong word, but every school is measured by test scores and attendance, and your money comes on this, your graduation rate. So everything's in a number. And then you have these like pop-up anecdotal stories, but they often don't illustrate the data. So there's just these random heart pull strings that, somebody's going to say this wonderful thing happened, but it doesn't loop back to the quantitative data. So we've really pushed hard in terms of the field as well as our schools of, once again, even the story in our school in California with the sex ring is, use attendance to indicate a pattern. Now start looking at other observations to illustrate that. But I do feel like we've been pushing the education field to have qualitative data be informative and weighted in a way that's different than everybody's failing, but now there's this really lovely story and a child with a puppy, and you're like that has nothing to do with the other piece. So be happy to talk about that more, but that is the same tension that I think that we have felt, and everybody's running for those hard numbers. I go back to Kentucky, everybody's looking at those numbers, and then I'm like, but they're not valuing the numbers, and I think we can get them another way if I get some qualitative context.
Well, I think that makes a really good, thank you. That's very helpful to say that you can often find those qualitative indicators just by pushing a little harder on your existing quantitative indicators.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because especially if they're not good. So then you're like, I need to figure out why they're not good so I can actually do something to improve them.
And we're nearing the end of our presentation time, but Paul Marsnick, who is a faculty member in our Entrepreneur Scholar Program and academic director of that program, has an entrepreneurial question that I think is very appropriate to close our program today. So Paul?
Okay, thanks. Margaret, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, I'm not going to put my camera on because I haven't combed my hair yet and I might scare people. Uh, I always tell my entrepreneurship students or anybody who's willing to listen, we need entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinkers in so many areas in the world today, in politics and healthcare, and especially in education. So kudos to you too, Angela and Anu, on what you've done. It's a fantastic story. But my question is, could you talk a little bit about the early days, and did you need investment funding to get this off the ground, or were you able to kind of bootstrap it right from the beginning by getting grants and so forth?
So we were really dependent on grants. So that was kind of our bread and butter, because much of our research, I mean, we've really only become available, quote unquote, to the market 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We spent the first 18 years, $40 million plus, which a little bit of a story on that one, just testing it. So we were competitively trying to get these grants. So kind of two stories in that. One is when we most recently got the $20 million scale up grant and we were not in a pandemic. I was at a meeting and there was a person there from Harvard, and we beat out Harvard, we beat out Stanford, and this person did not know who I was. And they said, I cannot believe that we got beat out by some school counselor in Minnesota. And so, and the reality is that, that some school counselor had data, and that's what we had that others did not have. So I kind of go back to our early thing is you need to, for us, we needed to be able to outmaneuver these huge organizations, because that's who we've been competing with. Was that now that schools are buying it and it's becoming, something that they're choosing to invest in, our tact is also kind of changing in terms of that work, and starting to have some other funders kind of step forward. But otherwise, it's been grants and subsequently schools choosing to invest in the model itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And we are now at noon, so I want to be respectful for time. Angie, Anu, amazing presentation. Thank you so much for this rich sharing of those data principles that we can all carry with us in our work as educators. I know that we do have a few other questions, particularly on higher ed, in the chat. Jason, if you want to hang for and talk about that question, that would be wonderful, or anyone else. We do have a bonus part that Benny's in Business is going to be sponsoring at 12:15, which is more of a casual conversation about Angie's founder story. And members of the BAR team will also be joining that conversation. So same link. So if you want to take a break and regroup and join us in about 15 minutes, we will be joined by leadership team members of Benny's in Business posing questions, as well as having an open channel for additional questions as well. We also will, this has been a recorded link. If you would like to get a link to this recording, we also will have this posted on our Donald McNeely Center for Entrepreneurship site with Angie and Anu's permission. We'll talk through that. So just make sure you note in the chat if you'd like to get a link, and we will follow up with you. So again, thanks for spending time with us on this Community Engagement Day after our first block, and best wishes to all of you as you launch into Block B. All right, Kelly, do you want to just pause the recording for right now, and then we'll just have a little bit of a break?
Yeah, so my name's Regan, and I am one of the co-presidents of Benny's in Business. So I was a part of the group last year when we originally launched the club. So now this is my second year, and I'm a senior now. So excited for the legacy to keep continuing on. And I have Molly with me here too.
Yep, I'm Molly. I'm a senior as well. Morgan and I head the mentorship program with Benny's in Business. This is my first year on the board, but second year as a member.
And Margaret's our awesome advisor, so she's been super helpful for us.
Yeah, and I'm Morgan, like Molly said. I'm the junior representative mentorship program chair. So we're both, this is our first year with Benny's in Business, but we are in our second year of our mentorship program that creates relationships for 120 current Benny students and then Benny alumni as well. Do you want us to just start off by asking the questions that we?
That makes sense. I think that, you know what, and we got a number of team members on here, so you can ask me, can ask others, but happy to respond to anything.
Awesome.
And maybe because it is a smaller group, it would be lovely if everyone from the bar team might be open to introducing themselves and how they got connected to the bar mission, because I think, you know, whenever you're working with an organization that is doing new things, it takes an entrepreneurial spirit to be a part of it. So I hope that that's okay for everyone to kind of also introduce themselves that are here today.
Sure. I'll start, Margaret. Hello everyone. My name is Anu Sharma, and I have been with the Bar Center with Angie's program model for about 20 years, and I primarily work in research and evaluation. So I've been evaluating the model since then.
Hi everyone, my name is Beth Heimer. I've been in elementary education for 25 plus years. And Angie had reached out to me a few years ago about looking at how elementary could benefit from the BAR model. So I did some of the research and development behind that, and I am the Associate Director of Elementary Schools for the BAR Center.
Hey guys, I'm Hannah Shearer. I'm the Strategic Partnership Director for BAR. I've been with BAR about 5.5 years. My background is similar to Angie's. I was a special education teacher for about 5, and then went in and got my master's in school counseling and was in the schools for about 20 years total, but really wanted to continue to work with schools and kids, but needed to step out for a while and find another way to do it. And so BAR was the perfect opportunity because it really was everything that I believed in, but another way of doing it.
Hi, I'm Ari Miran. I'm the communications manager with Bar Center, also known as Ari. Move the slide back, please. That would be me on the other end of things. I actually met Angie when I worked at St. Louis Park High School as a communications specialist, and I've worked at the White Bear School District as well, doing social media and website and different writing projects and video work as well. So thanks for all being here. Nice to meet you.
Hi everyone, I'm Allie Sipkins. I've been with the Bar Center 2 years now, but I've known Angie since I started my career in the nonprofit sector, and I work with her pretty closely as her executive assistant, and I do some special projects. But I have known Margaret as well, and just adore Margaret, and we're just so grateful that we're here, and thank you for having us.
And Allie was a really critical connection to introducing and linking us to Angie. So I mean, just like everything comes full circle, just delightful. We have some other voices on the call too. Diana, are you on? Would you like to introduce yourself? And we have Jay Benson. John, are you on?
Yes, and I think I even got my camera working.
There you are. And John's a new member to our community. So John, or relatively new.
Relatively new. You know, I've been here since November of 2019. I'm the Director of Institutional Research and Assessment. I don't know. I don't know Angie from St. Louis Park. I don't know her from anywhere really. I'm just super interested.
I'm glad you're here, John.
All right, and do we have any other voices to introduce? Otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to the Benny's and Business Leadership team to kick us off with the question.
All right. Well, I guess just kind of to get started, we were just kind of wondering like what your typical day-to-day life looks like. Are you in the schools? Are you in an office? Like, how does it look on a day-to-day basis?
I'll hit two things and then we'll go in, but it is, there's a couple things. First of all, I think I should point out that those that don't know, the picture on the slide is John B. King, who is the former U.S. Department of Education Secretary of Education, and he spoke at our conference. He's now also the president of Ed Trust, and he had just done, right before the holidays, this would be a little bit of an example of what a typical day looks like. Boy, we had maybe 24, 30 hours warning that he was willing to do a talk about what schools should look like after post-COVID if I wanted to film it with him, which of course, when the former Secretary of Education says, do you want to do this? You're like, yes. And then Hannah, in terms of a typical day, is driving to Best Buy to get these very fancy microphones. And New and I are trying to like come up with a script of some sort as we are, doing this in the wee hours in the morning. But pre-pandemic, I was traveling a lot. I'm hoping to not to travel as much after this, but I was traveling at least 3 times a month, so just going to, so much of the work is really understanding community and context. Initially, I don't work as much with the schools now. We have 14 full-time coaches. Each coach works the 10 to 12 schools. But right now, much of my work was, in DC, working with policy people, working at, state levels, working with funders, Gates, working with the Bell Network. So a lot of travel, kind of for a while. And I would say in general, a very fast pace that we pivot very, very quickly. Anu, Hannah, Beth, other thoughts on what a typical day looks like?
No, you look like you were gonna go. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a typical day is atypical. I mean, I really mean that because so this week we've worked on 2 grants. Hannah's working on a video for one of our grants to the Kellogg Foundation. Angie and I have been preparing for this presentation to all of you, which has been super fun to look back and look at how this journey began. I'm trying to think of what other things we've been doing. We've had meetings with strategic partners. We would call them strategic partners, and now via Zoom, all peppered throughout the week. Angie, you've been talking to our PR firm about articles, thought leadership, dissemination of the BAR model. You've been in touch with, I'm reaching because, when the days are so full, they get hard to remember. You've been in touch with the governor and the governor's staff in West Virginia. You have been talking to our coaches. We've been working on our project that's been funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, trying to prepare for a meeting of schools that will come together, unfortunately, virtually right now. In next month, all the principals and BAR coordinators will be coming together. We've been preparing for that. So there's nothing day to day that, like, don't become an entrepreneur if you want your days to be sameness, or if you want your days to be predictable, or if you want to shut the door at 5 o'clock and say, now I'm done, because it's just not like that. So it's really a life for those of us that have embraced this life. It's fun, it's fast paced, it's up and down, unpredictable, exhausting, but exhilarating. That's our typical day or week.
You said it well, with a lot of laughter. We are a team that really likes each other. I think we liked each other more when we could actually sit in the same space. Now it's all video, but we are a team that is, we live in Google Docs, and I'm sure you guys do for your projects as well. But I said to someone recently and they were shocked. They're like, really, you just write over each other? You're editing each other's words and you're okay with that? And that's exactly what this team is I think we all know it's a joint effort. We've got to get a message out and let's all kick in. And so you really try to, work as a team and not hold things personally, and you just let the document fly. But
I think another piece that you just covered really well with the John B. King Jr. panel is just increased media opportunities. And Anu had touched on it with thought leadership, but I think something that's more relatable and something that you might see as you're scrolling on social media or on the web is just these media inquiries that are reaching out to Angie for her thoughts and her thought leadership there. So she recently was in a USA Today article and has been on NPR. So I think being ready to kind of roll on the fly with any of those opportunities that demand a quick response is both relatable and something that, you know, I think that we see when we're scrolling, checking up on social media. It's like she's responding to some of those outreaches and they're pretty timely and require a quick turnaround. So those keep us on our toes too.
You know, I want to add one other thing because this is really, really important, is that the work that we do be grounded in integrity and data. So we don't report any results that we can't back up. We don't tell schools that they're going to get results that we can't back up. We don't make false promises. And that is really, really important to the value system of everybody on this call. So another thing that happened this week is we got a whole bunch of tables from our the American Institutes of Research, Excel spreadsheets with imputed data. This maybe was a better conversation for the previous hour, which was all about the transformational power of data. But Angie said, I don't understand these tables. Can you pour through them and look at them and help me understand them? So part of yesterday, I was on the phone with another research scientist on our team saying, I don't understand these data. You know, I get part of it. I need your help. So there's a lot of looking at the information, the foundational aspects of BAR, and working together to try and understand how we bring integrity to everything that we do.
The next question we had on a little bit different note was, how would you say you define success after the first few years of launching BAR? Like, was there a specific goal you had, a number of employees or number of clients, kind of along those lines?
Mm-hmm. I think we had two markers. One is, as Anu said, the schools have to still be getting impacts. So the 500th school that's implementing BAR needs to have the same impacts as the first. So a lot of the work we did the past year and a half was actually rebuilding out metrics and quality control to be able to assess as these new schools come on, that we can be able to see how they're doing, see if the coach needs support, see if the school needs support. But you know, I don't want to roll anything out if I can't assure that next school that they're going to have the same impacts that we did. So in terms of success is, in some ways, our schools are a marker, because if a school's not making changes anymore, then something has gone amok. I need to like pull back. So that's one thing. In terms of our staff, our growth has been pretty organic. So like, for example, when Gates came on, we knew we were going to have to hire, 2+ people. If we get these other projects, like as the new projects come on, that's how our growth comes. Beth was brought on when we knew we were growing to elementary. So I'm like, somebody's got to just shepherd elementary. That's a whole kind of beast within itself. So we can't absorb that with others. So like, as we either choose to take on another area or we choose to take on another project, we know we grow. And then there really has been very little attrition, if that makes sense. I mean, our team stays pretty tight. There's been, like a person who had kind of a family situation that, moved, but otherwise it's pretty much the team. So, and like we do know a team member has said, I want to retire in a year and a half. So we're already kind of talking about, okay, a year and a half from now, what are we going to do in terms of that role?
Thank you. On the flip side of the success, I know like it's not really fun or a big topic about failure, but how have you overcome failure, or what have been some of your biggest obstacles in launching BAR, and how have you overcome it?
I'll do two, but I don't have to talk the whole time, guys. So one is, if we don't get big grants, I'm pissed. I hate losing. So like, that's, a thing. And then we do a full autopsy. So we just had those this past fall because there was 2 big grants that we didn't get. So I'm like, everybody on the call, everybody get ready. We're going to spend a couple hours and go through this, see what happened. Why didn't we get this money? Why didn't they think we were clever? Because clearly we're clever. So what did we do poorly in terms of communication? So like, that would be like, if we're not successful, it's not like I'm going to walk away. So it's like, okay, if this didn't happen, we need to unbundle this thing because we need to like kind of change course. So that would be an example, because those grants, once again, are typically $5 to $10 million. So like we don't write small grants. So like all the grants we're writing are multi-million-dollar grants. So they're either big wins, or when they're not big wins, then you're like, ooh, you know, kind of what happened. So that would be kind of a piece. I think the other piece is we've really been growing in terms of how do schools adopt this themselves. And that's been a real area. I don't think it's been, I don't know if I'd say it's a failure because we've only started 2 or 3 years ago, but it's a hard market to go in, especially when you're research based. So like many schools see us as a research project, and all of our evidence is not flashy and slick and beautiful. So it's part of the reason that also Ari and Hannah are working so hard on trying to help make it, you know, shinier, because the market wants shiny things. They don't care about effect sizes. So like that's been growth. But Hannah, others, I'd be curious.
Yeah, I was going to have you tell your story where you thought you were going to get a gold star. That's my one memorable moment of I felt like, yep, we did not get a gold star. Now what?
Yeah. So got a phone call from, it was the Arnie Duncan administration. And so the woman's name is Naja Dabi. She was the Assistant Secretary of Education. So you get this phone call and they're like, we would like to come meet you. And I am like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a gold star moment. They're going to be like school counselor in Minnesota, done good, figured this whole thing out. So she came and she had her team and she dressed me down. She's like, you don't have a website. You don't have anything. I'm like, no, like we're doing all the research and we're sending it to you. And she's like, you're going to end up being a white paper. We're going to know how we could have transformed our schools across the nation, and nothing happened. And I was like flabbergasted because I, once again, was pretty excited about this meeting. I knew you were there too. And she was not having it. She was like, nope, you're in charge of communication. Nope, you're in charge of marketing. You're in charge of everything. So that was a notable failure that I also thought was going to be a moment of glory. So that was fun.
You know, there's also been the whole school counselor from Minnesota thing. You know, Angie has been I don't know what the right word is, what the right verb is, but has been subjected to people who have evidenced snobbery and said, you couldn't possibly have this kind of success without a PhD. You couldn't possibly have done this well, you know, without the credentials that I have, not me, but, you know, the person speaking that I have, or that I think you should have. So there's been a lot of challenge to how could you possibly have achieved this kind of success in schools without whatever I think you need to have to achieve that kind of success. And that's been, I think, that's been disappointing. It's been disappointing to the entrepreneurial spirit that I think all of you are looking to evidence. I mean, you know that entrepreneurship is a lot about who you are and not the credentials that you necessarily amass. I mean, it's about what you're willing to do, and it's about who you want to be. I mean, of course, the credentials are helpful. They school you. They give you a discipline. It seems like from my background, school really gave me the discipline that I needed to keep going and to persist. But there was a lot more than I needed, you know, just in terms of my personship. And I think, Angie, you've been, I wouldn't call it victimized or bullied, but it's in that vein where I think people have been disdainful in a way that I've been kind of shocked at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's about 90% men. So with these meetings, so just in terms of when we talk about gender, it's about 90% men. Most of them are coming from very well credentialed, big ivory organizations. So it's, you know, it's the USC, and it's, you know, Harvard, and it's all these, you know, kind of things, or it's like Pearson. So it's the big established organization. So being an entrepreneur, and the good news is, once again, winning these grants is fantastic organizationally, but it did not make friends. They're like, who was this person who stole this money from us? you know, we're like, we had the data, like that's back to our story. We had the data to show that this works and, you know, can do this. But that I've gotten more than one phone call out of the blue that I also had delusionally thought it was like, oh, you want to work together. And I was like, stay out of Boston, which really was a phone call I got where it was like, we work in Boston. We don't need your help here. And I'm like, well, the schools asked us to come, so I don't know what to do. And so, but there's been, yeah, that's a helpful piece, Anu.
Molly and Regan, to step on questions, but I just am curious about a follow-up to just the failure, but more so, you know, in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of pivoting. And are there, as you look back over the last 20 years, key pivots that something happened that you decided to pivot in a different direction, or can you speak to that?
We pivot with the money. It sounds like an odd thing. Our model was initially proven to be effective in terms of a risk reduction model. So we know that students drink less, they smoke less, they have less suicide ideation, and that's where the money was to do the research. I knew a precursor to that is they would also pass their classes, but there was no money for that. So initially all the research was around risk reduction. Then the money was around, you know, kind of doing well in school. Then there's a lot of interest around, you know, closing the gap, which all of these things have been happening all along. How we message it, which once again then becomes Hannah and Ari all the time. And like right now, our conversations that we're having with West Virginia, they're really interested in opioid response. And the reality is, regardless if we come in as an opioid response tool, the students will pass more classes, they will be more engaged, so they'll get the same outcomes. But like the pivots in particular have been a lot around messaging.
The model has stayed intact. So there's one, again, this goes back to the integrity. There are certain pivots that we have been unwilling to make, and that is significant changes to the model. So I think regardless of, you know, every funder has their pet thing that they say, I want you to investigate this. And we believe that the BAR model is so comprehensive and so systemic that it can achieve the outcome that is of interest, whether that's athletic eligibility, as we talked about in the last hour, or whether it's standardized test scores, or whether it's, you know, closing the achievement gap for Black or Latino students or students in poverty. But the model, I mean, that's where we have not made any pivot. So I think, Margaret, your question is making me think about where are we willing to make a pivot and where are we not willing to? And we have not been willing to. We've been willing to study the model. We've been willing to refine the model. We've been willing to add components that we think would enhance it, but not change its core fundamental purpose and what it's designed to achieve.
Well, and Anu, I love that, because one of the points, or one of the things that I've always taken pride in BAR is part of the BAR model has an SEL, a social emotional curriculum, and it is a book, and it's something that the teachers use and they facilitate. So if you were in the last presentation, the what's on your plate would be in there. One of the things that has always been asked of BAR is, how do we just get your book? Yeah, we do the rest of the stuff, but we just want your book. And I've been so proud of Angie and our team that it's not something you can just get, because we know that this book is not going to fix or have the solutions you need in your building. You need to do all of these things. And the relationship and the data is so important to us. We would rather have you take it all than, you know, us make a little money on a manual. And that has been something that I've always taken pride in, and we continually have to have that conversation though. I'd say probably Angie on a monthly basis gets asked over and over, how do we get your book? But it's more than that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting. And especially as a club, we can use kind of your steps that you've taken with failure and kind of implement it with us. So kind of switching to more of a Benny's in business-based question. As I said in my introduction, we are on our second year of our mentorship program with 120 individuals. And as our second year kind of comes to an end with the semester, we find it valuable to share success stories of people who have had mentors. So I was wondering if any of you could touch on how your mentoring relationships has positively impacted your careers and your success that you have in bar.
That one's tricky. I'll be honest. Like, especially when you're an entrepreneur, one of the things that's been tricky is there hasn't been a template to follow. And we haven't really had, like, quote unquote, necessarily ally organizations that have supported this work. So I feel like in terms of our mentorship, at least from my lens, it's really been more of a team mentoring each other, either in terms of navigating next challenges, because there hasn't been somebody to say, hey, watch out for this bump, or hey, look for this. So you haven't had that same relationship that in terms of a traditional mentor to be like, here's the path I took, here's how you went. Because we actually tried that. We actually paid for consultants. We had other people coming in to be like, how do you do this? And then once again, it took us a while to be like, oh, apparently when you're an entrepreneur, there isn't a way to do this. So like, even in terms of our piece, the Bar Center itself didn't even come into existence probably till 5-6 years ago. And then we had a umbrella organization that served as our fiscal sponsor while we were getting kind of our work going, because our work serving the schools has now been going on for 20 years, which has also been a little bit of a tricky storyline to, explain to Bill and Melinda Gates that you're like, in terms of a 501c3, we've been registered now for, 2 or 3 years. The work's over 20 years old, but we first were, doing it in these different partnerships. So for me, would consider my colleagues to be mentors as we're pivoting and trying new things, as well as having a humility to be like, that was a bad move and I need to move away from that. By the way, I'm moving to a plug-in because my battery's low. So just know that we're now going to move the computer.
I'll go ahead and jump in, only in that, coming from elementary, I was assigned a mentor teacher. I was assigned to be a mentor teacher. So really knowing that traditional concept in terms of this is your one point person that you can go to run ideas past, get suggestions, get advice, which is a wonderful thing to have in place rather than not. I will say moving to the Bar Center, as Angie said, it's a much more team approach. Every person on the bar team has their own experience and their own expertise and their own lens, which is extremely critical in terms of making sure that what we are doing is not a siloed approach to one demographic, but it really is looking at everyone as a whole. I think of with the elementary program, we're developing, the elementary products. And most recently, we have deadlines, and the publisher was like, do you really need to have all 4 or 5 of you working on this project? It seems like, time efficiency, it would make more sense if just a couple of you did this. And collectively, we're all like, no, we all need to be having our lens and have our input, because it really makes a difference when you are receiving mentorship and experience from several people versus just one. So I would say that has been something that has been notably different in my path here at Bar versus being in a traditional elementary school setting.
It seems to me, just as I think about each of your journeys, though, you took a leap from something big, and I'm just curious about, sometimes it's the formal mentorship program like Morgan's describing. Sometimes it's just people that come into your life that give you advice or courage or confidence to think about something else in different ways. And if any of you might be able to speak to that, especially for our undergraduate students that are thinking about themselves perhaps in ways that might not be as big as what they could be. If maybe you could share a few of your stories.
I'm happy to share because Margaret has actually been an informal mentor of mine for many years and served on the board of directors of the previous organization that I worked with. And as I was making this decision to leave an organization that I had a deep relationship with, it really is about that encouragement and the storytelling about the risk that you need to take in your life, and you need to step out of your comfort zone and try something new and experience different cultures and experience a new set of people and how they work together. So Margaret and I used to meet twice a year for coffee at Yum in St. Louis Park. And actually Angie and I used to meet twice a year at Yum in St. Louis Park before I made the decision. It took me a while, but it was through that mentorship and that modeling of the risk taking that allowed me to then feel confident enough to come to BAR. And it's been an amazing experience. So
I would agree, Allie. I mean, for me, I was trying to think because I've made a few big leaps, and school's a safe place. As a teacher, you know, you tend to find your building that's comfortable. You tend to find your peers, and then you have your safety nets of insurance and tenure and all of the things that come. You know, why does one leave it? You know, I think you really have to listen to your heart. Obviously, you know best when you want something else. And then it's always great to have sounding boards. I think I wouldn't go as far as to always say it's a mentor, somebody who's a good listener and a sounding board for me, and someone that I can at least start to share. And then I hear myself and maybe my restlessness or my frustration or whatever it is that I'm starting to feel, to be able to take it in and listen back and hear what's the next step for me. You know, going from special education and leaving that and getting a master's in another piece of education brought me back into the schools, but in a very different way. But to leave the schools altogether is a pretty big leap. And people often ask, you know, why would you do that? Most of us here chose to do that in some capacity. And so I think all of us, it may be different reasons, but honestly, if anyone, it was me hearing myself talking to my students, and I wasn't as inspiring as I used to be. And I wasn't listening as much as I used to. And I would walk away at the end of the day and be upset with myself about why wasn't I? And so for me, it was a lot of reflecting and needing to talk to other people and realize I needed to take a space. I needed to do something different.
I think, Hannah, that really resonates with me. I remember talking to my dad in the spirit of candor, as Angie was saying. He was like, "You're leaving the school district?" Like, wait, I need to know more about this. But I think Angie hooked me at one of her conferences when she was talking about liking her breakfast milk. I don't know, or not liking breakfast milk for some reason. I was so captivated by just how genuine you were and the passion for what your work that you were doing, that I literally was just immediately, you can tell your passion is so genuine, and everybody who works for BAR is so genuinely passionate about what they do. I immediately after was just like one speech at a conference, and I was like, ever since I think believing in what you're doing is so important, and having someone lead in that really genuine and authentic style is what I find just really inspiring and both helpful in day-to-day work and a lifelong mission of, I think, doing what you really care about.
No, and by the way, we did pursue RA for 2 years, guys, just so you know that. So like the feeling was mutual, but I think that when it talks about growth, we didn't have money for a communications person. We didn't have money for these other things, but I kept going, boy, if we get money, you know who I would love to work with. But I think that even in terms of those relationships, I'll go back to in terms of, there's been many times, and people have talked to me before things, in probably the past 3 or 4 years, things have really gone well. But up to the first 17, 18, people are like, I just think you're killing yourself. I don't know if it's going to make a difference. I don't know if it's going to ever hit. And I kept going, but it's making such a big difference for the schools and families we're working with. I can't walk away. But like there were, I think you and I were in New York once, and I remember you going, I really think you need to give it maybe 6 months or another year. And if it doesn't happen, maybe you need to just like, kind of like take a break. And then I was like, okay, I hear you. And then it was like, but I can't take a break because the fact that the kids' lives are so much better, and the kids, the parents, lives are better, and the staff's lives are better. But then having amazing people around you. I think the other piece that I would share in terms of my work, you're seeing part of the team here. I try very hard to have very different voices around me because I don't need to hear the same thing all the time. So when I'm looking at who should we be hiring, people often do kind of like question, because like we have retired superintendents, who are, males who kind of very traditional. We have, people all across the country that come with very different experiences, very different voices, but especially if you're going to be entrepreneurial and you can't just stay in a cookie cutter mode, you need to hear everything. And I don't ever want it filtered. I think a new head, the only thing that people know makes me real grumpy is that people hide things from me. So I'm like, I need to hear the ugly. I need to hear the ugly in terms of staffing, the ugly in terms of the school, because there's no way I can improve it if I don't know it. So like, that's my one thing that everyone's like, Angie only gets upset when she doesn't know the bad news. I'm like, good news is fun. Bad news is necessary. I'm like, what's not happening?
I'm just going to add too, looking at my own journey here, my wheelhouse of comfort is fourth graders. I, can stand and be with them all day, every day, no anxiety in terms of getting in front of them and spending time with them. And taking a leap where the amount of times that I am pushed outside of my comfort zone, because this is all brand new, and the amount of times that, Angie will say, we'll be needing you to do X, Y, and Z. And inside of me saying, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. And that feels really uncomfortable to even think about doing X, Y, and Z, let alone I know you actually are going to have me do this. But being centered with everybody that we work with, as Ari says, so believes in what they're doing. And Angie has always said to me, it's not about me feeling comfortable. It's about what we are doing for the kids and the educators. And really constantly being able to find for yourselves what centers you, what do you believe in, and where do you want to make that impact? You really are able to push your own feeling of discomfort and generate it into the bigger purpose of why you are doing what you're doing, whether it's in education, whether it's in another business, whether it's in another direction in your life. I think really looking toward why are you doing it and why do you believe in it, I think will help regardless of what career you're going into.
I kind of feel like I should tell somewhat of a, if it's okay, a humorous story when Beth talks about that, because our conference has now been like 400 or 500 people that are coming to our conference. And our keynote speakers are, once again, Arnie Duncan, John King, where I'm like, how did this happen? So then I'm like, and I'm the speaker, like I have to everybody was fully aware before our last conference on our team that like we didn't have enough room. We thought it would be 200 people, and it was 300 people, and it's 400 people, and it's 500 people. And we have, all of these, different people that are coming. And two things happened. One, I had a nightmare the night before because it was a huge snowstorm, and I had, and I apologize, John, if this is kind of a thing, but I got these great shoes, women, like solid shoes. They were not practical shoes, but they were amazing shoes I thought was going to make this thing happen. But then all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know if there's going to be steps up to where I have to give my opening speech. So I was having a dream that I was having to like jump with these shoes, like up on top. Like this is my nightmare of how am I going to get up here? And like John King's have to pull me up because my shoes aren't working. Well, bottom line is like I show up, and then it was back to anytime I start thinking about me, and if it's like, this is uncomfortable for me, then that's a rabbit hole of nothing that's going to come good about it. Versus there are amazing educators doing amazing work with amazing kids. And we know this model works. The data is ironclad that this is going to make a difference for kids in their lives, especially kids who are farthest from opportunity. So it's like, pull yourself together and be able to move it forward. But I would encourage all of you, like find out what that bigger purpose is. And by the way, be aware of those shoes. Like you got to get up on stage. That's all I'll say. Perfect. I'm glad you get the shoes, John. Sometimes you're like, I got to pull up the big guns. It's like some legit shoes here. So yes.
Well, we greatly appreciate
About 5 more minutes. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we greatly appreciate everyone's time. And those are all the questions we had on our end. I don't know, Margaret, you can take it away from here, but we just want to be respectful of your guys' time. So thank you.
I mean, it's just been, I just was thinking to myself as I was listening to these last bits of conversation, for me, what a powerful 2 hours this has been on Friday during this community engagement day. Have really appreciated.
I'm so honored.
Each of you. So thank you so much for all. In closing, I have to ask one more question because I'm just so curious about it, and I really have such a appreciation of the liberal arts and the fact that people come, you know, and you think about you're choosing a major, but you just don't know the entrepreneurial journey. And you're a mathematician, trained mathematician that has entered, and many of you have come from education. Angie, you're a musician. This call be entrepreneurial, or just that link to passion, maybe is what Andrew was just talking about before. But just, do you ever have any thoughts just about being bold about your interests and making change based on what you've been trained or what your passions happen to be? As a closing question.
I'll do two things. So I had a hard time coming up with a major too. So I was pre-med for 2 years because I love science. And then I always was interested in music. So then I was music performance. Then I got the K-12, degree. So I first of all kind of hopscotched around a number of departments, at St. Ben's. And then I hated student teaching. So that was my other thing. So I was student teaching and I was like, I don't love this. I should have checked this out earlier, which is why then I got my master's in counseling. So I'm like, I have to be employed. And then counseling, once again, was a really good fit, but I am a systems thinker. So I think the biggest thing, Margaret, is once again, taking out those other pieces. Hannah and Ari know in particular, I'm still very creative. I love music. I love creativity. I come up with, once again, kind of these crazy ideas that we're even trying to deal with right now because I love that part of me and it hasn't gone, but now, kind of growing a business is other pieces. Anu, I don't know if you've got another one.
I do. I think it's really important to not get stuck because you've invested time, money, and energy into one path. Hannah talked about this when switching careers. So very briefly, I was well on my way to getting a PhD in statistics. I was all but dissertation, passed my comprehensive exams, all the coursework done, and I realized I don't want to be a statistics professor. So I went to my mentor at the time. Mentorship has played a big role in my life, and said, I really think I want to know what makes people tick. I want to become a psychologist, but it's going to be a whole other, 5 years to get a PhD in psychology. And he said, how old will you be if you get a PhD in psychology? I said, I'll be 32. I was whatever at the time, 20 something. And he said, well, how old will you be if you don't get a PhD in psychology? And I said, 32. And he said, so, you're looking at, let's say you retire at 65. He just made up a number. He said, you're looking at this many decades of being happy, and, take away a few more years, you're looking at this many years of being unhappy. Make the change. So I made a complete career switch. I've used my mathematical and statistical training in applied research, but I didn't want to do just basic research in statistics and math. So I switched.
What wonderful advice to close on. We've hit 1 o'clock, so I want to be respectful to everyone's day. Thank you so much for Benny's in Business for saying yes when I brought forth the idea of you having this conversation and facilitating it. I see Paul Marsnick is on, and we have this recorded, so we will be able to share this terrific conversation with our broader entrepreneurial students into the future as well, because it's just so fabulous to have founders' stories and founder team perspectives, because it does take a village for an organization to launch, iterate, and continue to grow, which certainly BAR illustrates so well for us today. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you again. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.